So based on that, here's a question about migrations, even though you've technically not seen them until 5 minutes ago. But based on what you've seen about Rails, based on what you know about Ruby and yield and how that stuff works, this is a snippet of the up method that I just showed you in the example. And the question is, when it says create table and something is yielded back to this do block, what is probably the type of thing that is yielded back? What would be a reasonable assumption of what kind of a thing T is in this example? Is it an object that represents the database, an object representing an instance of the model, an object representing a database table, or given the information we have, it could be anything, and it's not fair to ask the question. OK, what does everybody else say? What does everybody else say? We have red and green appear to be the most popular options among those who are voting. Those who are not voting, you must be thinking about something else. All right, talk it over for a little bit, and let's see if we can converge between red and green. OK, shall we try a revote? Revote says, I think red has won the America's Cup of this question, although there are still people holding out for green. But let's go through the answers here. So what kind of thing might T be? When you're looking at code and you're not familiar with the code a priori, it is a good skill for software engineers to have to try to infer intent from the code that the programmer wrote. And if the programmer wrote their code well, according to some of the habits that we're going to try to teach you all, then in some cases you should be able to use things about the code, like method names and the context in which things are used, to make some inferences, even if you haven't seen it before. So if we apply that in this example, well, there's a couple of things we could say here, right? Could T plausibly be an object representing the database? Well, what are we doing with T? There's a method on it called datetime, and there's methods that you saw in my original code snippet, like string and text and integer. So does it really make sense to talk about calling methods like that on an entire database? I would be skeptical, because a database consists of a collection of tables, right? And this could apply to any one of them. Could it be an object representing an instance of a model? Well, we're talking about the attributes of models in general, right? We're saying that movies in general have a release date, have a string, have a something. These are statements that are about the class as a whole. They're not a statement about a particular instance of that class. So it seems less likely to represent an instance of a model. What about the hypothesis that it could represent a table? Well, let's see. It's an argument to the create table call, and it's talking about the kinds of things tables care about. Tables care about attributes that have names and types, like an attribute named release date whose type is datetime. So that, in my opinion, would be the most reasonable assumption, and it is in fact the correct one. What actually is being yielded here is an object that essentially represents the table that is going to be created and is allowing you to set up things about that table. So in one sense, you could say this wasn't a fair question because you weren't allowed to look at the documentation and so forth. But it's also, I think, an opportunity to take a look at somebody tried to write code and name methods and use them in a way that would give you some clue as to what they're trying to do, even if you're not familiar with that part of Rails. So that's where we are with that.